Welcome back, everybody, to Real Estate Junkies Coast to Coast. I am Rusty Ham on the West Coast.
And I'm Rick Abbiati from the East Coast, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. We got it right. I usually cut you off or talk over you when you say that. So I'm getting better at it after 20 plus episodes with you. Good stuff. We had some great questions, not only in our weekly calls, but we have a mastermind every week, right? On Thursdays, typically at 5 o'clock Eastern time. And masterminds, that started back, when they were building the railroad system, right? It was Vanderbilt and all those guys, Carnegie, those guys got together and they created a mastermind. I don't know if you knew that or not. Masterminds have been around for a long time. So we have a mastermind every Thursday where the associates, we get together and we just go over a lot of things. We have a Q&A session. We'll congratulate people. We'll role play. We'll do some scripting, right? When to scale. So that's what we're going to do now. Again, our warm-up, we have a warm-up game plan. Cool down, our warm-up is mindset, skill set, and system. We're going to talk about skill set and when to scale, specifically with a VA. Well, we can talk about EA. We've sort of touched on it, but let's get a little deeper on when somebody should scale with a VA. And you said you had a hard set rule. What rule is that with you?
So, yes, VAs are wonderful. They do take some load off you and they increase the number of dials because that's what they do. That's what they specialize in. So, but having said that, and I've seen people come in and, they figure, well, I'll have my VA make all the dials and they don't become familiar with the scripts or anything else. They expect the VA to do all the work. And that's just the wrong approach. You need to be fluent in the scripts because just remember, you're the one who's going to be making the follow up calls. And you also have to spend time with your VAs. Some of them may need training, so you'll have to review their phone calls, listen to their calls, critique their calls, help them with any challenges they're having with sellers. So you need to know what you're doing before you go off and hire VA generally.
Right, and that's what I said in the mastermind today, right? We had an associate, it's like we were going over what the KPIs should look like, right? It's about 10 to 15% are going to pick up. 35% is your conversion if you get live, blah, blah, blah. So we were going through that and he was saying, okay, well, 20% conversion is low, right? And we thought it was for him. And he said, no, it was for my VA. So my advice to him, my coaching advice was, well, you got to treat her or him like we treat you, right? You got to have them send you calls. You got to critique the calls. You got to make sure they're saying the right things. You got to be good on the phone so that, just like you said, you got to be good on the phone so that you could train your VA, because your VA is not perfect. They're not in the trenches like we are on a daily. They're just dialing, right? So he's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, because 20% conversion is low. And there is a bottleneck there, and you got to find out what that bottleneck is. So like you said, you got to meet with them. You got to find out what's going on.
Yep. I know my VAs, and I've got two VAs, and they're constantly talking about any bottlenecks they're having, any challenges that they're having. Occasionally, what I did last week is I said, when you get a hard no, and you want me to critique the call to see if you could have said anything different, go ahead and put that. And we use Slack as well. I just have a separate account set up for them. So they submitted a call, and tonight when I met with them, we critiqued a couple calls.
Yeah,
And
that's huge. Critiquing the calls, yeah, especially your VAs, right? Because I did the same thing, and wasn't necessarily what he was saying on the phone. It was it was bad communication with me and him at the very beginning. He wasn't categorizing leads the correct way, so his numbers were low because he wasn't including passive leads, right? I have a realtor, I rented it. No, not right now. It's sold, but it's pending, right? So those are all passive. Those are still leads, and he wasn't counting them. So once he started counting them, all of a sudden his conversion went from like 15% to where it's supposed to be like the 30 to 35%. So we found out what the bottleneck was, which is he didn't know what a true lead was, right? So those are very important. But the moral of the story, and again, I used to, and you and I both went through the 90-day program. I coached it for a while. We were both W-2. We both had very busy schedules. It's very easy for someone to say, okay, well, I just want this ready in a box VA to just start making dials for me, and then I'll just do the follow-ups because that's the only time I have, right? And that's the wrong approach, in our opinion, as coaches.
Yeah, and I'd say along with that, to kind of sum it up, is so this is a business. So if you're in business, you treat it like a business. That doesn't mean hiring people to do all the work for you. It is going to take some work, and you only become good by the at bats that you have, by making those dials and talking to sellers.
Right. Yeah. So scaling, you got to know the business. I mean, there's certain people that just buy businesses and then they delegate everything else, right? This is a little different, right? You're trying to buy real estate. You need to talk to the sellers, because every situation is different, and everything. There's always nuances, in each deal, and you got to get good at those nuances so that you can pass those on to your employees, your VAs. But you need to get in the trenches first, go through those painstaking phone calls, get yelled at, get hung up on, go through all those, and then you can scale and train. Because in the very beginning, we want to keep those costs low, right? We want to all you want to worry about is, okay, I need to pay for what? Leads. I need to pay for maybe a phone number, and I need to pay for what? A CRM maybe, right? We just kind of discourage CRMs in the beginning as well, right? Just because it can get distracting. So we just want you to get on the phones with a list. That's it. And then once you get good, then you can, and we call it scaling, right? Or stacking, right? And then you can, okay, then I can bring a VA in and take some of that load off, right? Because eventually you don't want to be doing those $5 to $10 an hour jobs, right? Eventually you want to be doing 500 per hour type of jobs, right? Which is writing up contracts and getting them signed, right?
I think, if you listen to our calls, and we're still being critiqued. I know when I made that call at the ITTB, Chris was taking notes on the whiteboard as far as he was critiquing me while I was doing it.
I critiqued you.
Yeah. And so we're always critiquing. And I know we've done that together on calls before, but you don't, I mean, if people could have heard my first calls, and say, I'm sure same with you, we didn't get to that point without going through all the stuff.
Painful, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet Mike was just like, this is horrible. I can't. So yeah, and that's the only way you can get better. And the moral story is you got to get good, familiar with the scripts. You got to get fluent, like you said, so that you can pass that on to a VA. Because I always said it, there is a VA out there that we have that's ready in the box. You rip it open and you just sit there and you say you turn it on, right? So there's one guy out there that can do that, and he normally does FISBOs, right? And I just said that's right in the box. That's just you order it on Amazon, it comes over, and you open it up, it's ready to go. The VAs that we work with, I kind of equate it to like IKEA, right? It's in a box. All the instructions are there. It's ready to go. You just need to put the pieces together. And that's what our VAs are. They know what we do. They know like our scripts, sort of. They're familiar with it, but they're not like, they're not. It's not fluent, right? They seem robotic at times. You probably heard many of the VA calls, sort of robotic and sort of salesy in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, with mine, Angela has been with me now for going on 3 years. And for probably the first 6 months, I could tell it was very scripted. And I got to know her more personally. And I said, Angela, talk to the seller like you're talking to me or a neighbor or a friend. And she did it immediately, and everything changed. But
Yeah.
that was through listening to her calls.
Well,
And
we tell the associates, talk to the sellers like you're talking to your neighbor. Your neighbor just put up a house for sale, and you walk by with your dog, and you say, "Oh, what's going on? And where are you guys headed?" Just have a normal conversation. And people get so nervous. You know, we were both nervous, right, when we first started. It's understandable, but then after a while, it's like, well, I didn't die. I didn't fall over. They yelled at me and they cussed me out. So what? You just move on, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So it's very important that you hop on the phones first, get familiar, get fluent, and then you would then you can get a VA, so you can train those VA. Let's move over to another topic that we had on the mastermind today, which was buying homes subject to or owner financing, and then because our exit strategy most of the time is rent to own, right? So we get this house under contract, a taking, as we say, and then we find a rent to own buyer. We get a non-refundable down payment. We get cash flow. We get the principal pay down if there is any, and then we get a premium. That's how we get our. That's how we make our money. We don't make our money on the seller side. We make it on the buyer side. Talk about transitioning those rent to own buyers and then transition into maybe we sell or finance them, and now we become the bank.
right. And with the challenges with the high interest rates and tough banking criteria and whatnot, or lending criteria, you have a tenant buyer that has been in your property for, let's say, a year or two. They've been paying on time every month. And your situation, how you structured it with a seller, whether it's a straight sub two, which is great, or a sub two with owner finance where there's equity due to the seller. And let's say you have a 4-year balloon with the seller that's subject to the original mortgage is long term. So you could pay that seller off and you could finance your buyer, or you could finance your buyer and continue paying the seller and the mortgage through the seller through. It
With
just
a wrap.
depends with a wrap, right? Which is a common question, but you wouldn't do that with a seller coming into it. For the most part, you would make sure they have. We usually look for 20% down, a consistent on-time payment for at least a year, and then it basically makes your deal a long-term deal.
More lucrative too, because because typically a rent to own buyer is going to cash us out in 24 months, 18 to 24, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case. We do have a high success rate, but for example, I have one that they didn't fulfill their option, so I'm going to pivot on that one. But what you're saying is we get this rent to own buyer, they put a non-refundable down payment. Usually it's 3 to 10% for us. Let's say hypothetically they get to 10%, they're paying on time. They're not calling us, with, they're because they're buyers. So we're just, we check in every 6 months and we look, and houses in pristine condition. Okay, these are the buyers that we may be able to pivot and shift to. Okay, instead of you guys going through the process of finding a lender, why don't we just do it for you, right? And so we agree on terms with them. We charge them, 10% more, right? We want to get them to 20%. Once they do that, then the title is going to transfer to them. We charge them interest, an interest rate like they would if they were to the bank, right? And then, like you said, if the seller is a sub two, it has no equity, it's perfect. That's because that's an infinite, right? We don't owe the seller anything. The problem arises when the seller has an equity piece, right? In my case, I owe the seller $260,000. Technically or hypothetically, I could, seller finance, and I would have to wrap that $260,000 in equity, right? Title would transfer to the future buyer, correct?
Right.
That's what's sub two. With owner financing, a lot of our owner financing contracts are minimum 60 months. So you could right away after a year, seller finance the buyer, and then they would eventually, in order to cash everybody out, they would have to get a traditional loan, right? And cash everybody out at some point. They would refinance the house with a traditional lender and cash everybody out, right?
Right. And I remember I had one seller I was talking to that wanted, they were open to like a 12-year owner financing term, and they did not want it cashed out before 10 years at the minimum, which was a perfect situation to finance the buyer, the tenant buyer, because that they're going to go 10 years and then they'll refinance it.
Yeah, and somebody typically in interest rates now are still fairly high, but um, there's peaks and valleys with interest rates. Sometimes they drop, sometimes they go pretty high. I mean, it's probably going to level out or probably 5.5 at some point, and then we're going to be, when we sell or finance it to a future tenant buyer, we're going to be up in the 7, 8, 9% range, right? So at some point they're going to want to refinance out of that percent to get a traditional loan at a lower percent, right? Just like any that you have, right?
Right. And it is beneficial to the buyer. They don't have to go through the bank, and
Some point, yeah. If
all
they
of the
want to
rest.
refinance this, yeah, if they want to refinance this out, they would have to go through a bank. Yeah, good stuff. So we didn't want to dive too deep into the wrap mortgages because it can get fairly complicated. It is an exit strategy. So the moral of the story on this is there's not one way that we exit. Now we start out one way, which is the rent to own, and that's usually 18 to 24 months. It's predictable for us. We can predict, okay, if I get this contract here and I get a pretender buyer here, I'm expected to make X amount in 18 to 24 months. So it's predictable. However, there is another exit strategy that you can use. You can sell it traditionally, you can rent it, or you can sell or finance it. There's different ways you can do it. If it's sub two or owner financing, lease purchase, AO, those two are out of the picture. We wouldn't do those unless you converted the lease purchase to a sub two, which has been done before too, right? Where we transfer the title to stop the clock for whatever reason, and then now we own it sub two. Now we can, now we have that flexibility, right? Okay, cool down. We either it kind of has turned into this. We either talk about the end of the trenches boot camp, or that's not going to be until June. So let's talk about QLS Live 2025. That is going to be October 6th and 7th, right?
In Boston. Yep.
In
Awesome.
Boston. So what's cool about that is my wife and I are going to come up. We're going to fly in Friday, spend Saturday and Sunday in Boston together, hang out, and then Monday and Tuesday will be the QLS. So we're going to be able to kind of make it a combination vacation and work. But describe QLS. I know we've done it before. The importance of QLS, why people should go. Number one, this would be my 6th QLS. A couple of them have been virtual, but mostly have been either Rhode Island. Last year was in Boston, which was awesome. Benefits of going to QLS. Why should somebody go to QLS?
So, we've all heard, and it's so true, that being around, surrounding yourself with like-minded people, and it's much better in person than it is through Zoom, which we do all week in and week out. But you have that opportunity to meet all face to face, get to know each other as well. After the event in the evenings, dinner time, you get to know each other personally, which is awesome. But you also have really great speakers that Chris and the family team bring in. Last year we had Forbes Riley, and we had other great speakers there, whether it's REI Black Book or Fund and Grow. We have attorneys. There was a panel of attorneys that spoke, very informative. So there's a lot of nuggets that are taken away from every live event. It's just an encyclopedia. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, show me a coaching program that will bring on attorneys, right? And these attorneys were awesome because a lot of people have questions around sub two. right? Some people think it's illegal. Some people that it's a scam. Um, and how and on the flip side, as investors, how could we utilize it and be protected at the same time? So that was a huge, I think one guy was up in the Northeast, and then there was somebody in Florida, and every state has, different rules. So that was kind of cool where they're like, hey, here, here, and here, you do this, this, and this. So that was an eye opener for me with some of the things they talked about, because you and I both have done sub two. So there was a couple. I've done the sub two, and I sort of knew what I was supposed to be doing, but they even said some things that I was like, oh, well, I probably should be doing that to protect myself, right? Mostly it was about the trust and who the beneficiary of the trust was. I had my company, and they're like, you probably should have the owner as, the beneficiary, and so it was super important on that. Like you said, Forbes Riley, she was awesome. You mentioned Fund and Grow. Some people might not know what that is, or Seven Figures, right? There's a couple companies or Ease, right? We use Ease as well, which is a business credit. And I used my business after Fund and Grow came and spoke. I applied and I got $90,000 approved, right? 12 months, 0% interest. And that's where I was able to purchase two of my sub twos, because I had to put money down, and that money down came from my business credit. So I was able to capture those two properties because of the business credit. So Fund and Grow and Seven Figures, again, those are, and again, we're not going to, and Chris says this all the time, we're not going to present something to you unless we're doing it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So it's super important that you guys are getting business credit as well.
And I think one of the other things with these live events, you can't afford not to go, because it's that one nugget, and most likely more than one nugget, that you miss out on that could totally change your business.
Yeah. And not only the live portion of it, which means, you're sitting there listening to these live speakers. I got a lot just talking to people outside,
You mean
during live.
at the Irish pub?
Yeah. Yes, at the Irish pubs. But you're getting to know people that are in the community, like-minded people, right? You're all there for the same reason and our passion is not necessarily to make money. Yes, that's secondary actually to us. The money that we make, it's infinite in some cases, and it's good, right? But we're trying to change lives. We're trying to, empower people to change their lives. I've changed my life. You've changed your life. We've had another person in the community just retire from her W-2 because she was just over it, and now she's like full bore wanting to do this business, right? And so we were able to help her achieve her goal, which is to leave her W-2. That's
Yep.
our main goal, and that's the reason why we go to these things. And the people that go are going for a reason. They want to change their lives. There's something in their lives that, you know, it's holding them back, which probably is a W-2, to be honest with you. Could be family, like you've said before, but the people bring baggage, and that baggage usually is a W-2 that they're absolutely miserable about. So that's why
Yep.
you should come to these things.
Yep. It's an event that we only do it once a year, and we used to do it twice a year, but now it's down to once a year because we do the In the Trenches boot camps now, so which is usually every other month.
Yeah. Yeah, QOS is huge. I've learned a lot.
Now that you mention it, the In the Trenches boot camp, this last one, Rusty, and you and I were both at it. How many deals did we come out of that with?
Oh man. Well,
It was a few.
we had one taken under contract, and then like 4 or 5 offers sent out, and we're still negotiating those offers. They're not dead.
Yep.
Yeah. So these In the Trenches boot camps have been huge, not only for the people, right, but for us as well. I mean, we're in the trenches. We're calling the sellers for the drafting offers. We're having them send them out. We're editing their purchase and sale agreement. So this is, it's huge if you can attend to these In the Trenches boot camp. like you said, it took over because we used to, again, the second one used to be around this time, and it's called the Summit, and it was similar to QoS. It was like it was almost like a carbon copy of it, and they're like, "Why are we doing this twice? Why don't we just do this like mini ones monthly or every other month?" I think it's bi-monthly now, but we found a lot more success, not only for people that are coming into the community and wanting to get coached, but current associates getting deals from these things, right? So it's kind of a dual thing, which is people who aren't in the community and they decide to come in because they see what we do. And then we have people that are currently in that are getting deals done, which is kind of cool as well. Awesome stuff, Rick. Enjoy San Antonio.
Thank you.
Enjoy the Riverwalk. Make sure you go on the Riverwalk.
Oh, yeah, been there many times.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we'll see you next week. When are you coming back?
I'll be back. Actually flying back on the 2nd.
Flying back on the 2nd. Awesome. Have fun, Rick. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, Rusty.
Bye,
Always a pleasure.
everybody.
See you,
See ya.
everyone.